Pastor Corey here once again for your weekly Facebook devotional. So Pastor Steve has asked us to share with you all a little bit about ourselves as we do this. And so one of the things I want to share with you this week is the fact that I love movies. I love all different kinds of movies. Some of my favorites are Tombstone, Dumb and Dumber, Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail, the Batman trilogy starring Christian Bale, Indiana Jones, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So those are just a few. I have several more, but those are just a few of the movies that I really love. And so I got this from my dad, who loves movies as well. And so one of the things that I remember growing up was that we used to have what we called bad movie night. And every Saturday night, my dad and my brother and I would sit in front of the TV, and we would either watch one of the really bad movies that was on Sci-Fi, or we would watch what was a show that was called Mystery Science Theater 3000. And so that is basically where there was a group who would sit down and watch a really bad movie, and then they would make fun of it the whole time. And so we used to have bad movie Saturday nights, and to this day when my dad comes and visits, we still do that. I go try to find a really bad movie, and me and him pick which one we want to watch, and we generally watch it and didn't talk about how really terrible that it was. And so and on some of these, on most all of these, the plot is just horrible. Like, it's so far out there and so far bizarre. You're like, what in the world is going on? Like, what am I watching? And so, one of those plots might be that the main villain is trying to clone himself or herself because they think if they have more of themselves, that they can better rule with an iron fist. They can get more stuff done. They can make sure that everything's done the way that they want it to be done. And so, honestly, these movies are not meant to make you think. Like, if you're going into them trying to think, they're not meant to make you think. They're meant to entertain you. But if you do begin to think about them, you start to think, what in the world is going on? Who could make this stuff up? And most of the time, these movies have nothing to do with anything important or anything significant. But for a moment, let's just take the cloning plot that I just talked about. How many times have you and I said something to the following: I have so much to do and so many things that are vying for my attention and vying for my time. There's just not enough of me to go around. And in that moment, if we could clone ourselves, we probably would. Why? Because physically, we can only be at one place at one time. And oftentimes this becomes very clear, glaringly clear, and becomes very evident with our crazy busy schedules and with our often double booked schedules. And this is why so many times we see one parent goes in one direction with one child and the other parent goes in the other direction with the other child, or we see that one spouse goes in one direction with their job and with their hobbies, and another one goes in the other direction with their job and hobbies, and we just hope that we meet somewhere at the intersection. Hope we maybe get to say hi to one another as we pass along, and we just hope that no one in our family adds anything else to their schedules, because there's just no way we could fit it in. In these moments, we become very aware of our physical and spatial and time limitations. Now, this coronavirus epidemic has really calmed this down for many people, but what we know to be true is that once this is gone and once things get back to some sense of normalcy, we're going to pick right back up where we left off, and our lives are going to be just as crazy and as busy as ever. And as we become aware of our physical and spatial and time limitations, it would be easy for us to project these limitations on God, and for us to begin to believe that maybe God is bound by these same limitations that we are. Maybe we begin to think or ask questions like, maybe God is so busy that I shouldn't pray to Him and bother Him with this small issue in my life and just wait until something major comes up. Or can God really be helping the people in China and be helping me here where I'm at all at the same time? Or maybe God does only show up and speak while we're at the church building during a worship service or during a Bible study. Maybe He can only be found at church. And as we begin to think about these things, and as these things may begin to kind of creep up, it brings to mind our doctrinal word of the day. So doctrinal word of the day is omnipresent. We believe that God is omnipresent, which means that God is present at every point of space and everywhere in creation at the same time and in his whole being. Omnipresent means that God is present at every point of space and everywhere in creation at the same time and in his whole being. But as we struggle with our limitations, we may begin to project these onto God and may begin to believe maybe this just isn't true about him. And maybe for some, especially during this time when we're not able to go to the church building to worship God as we normally would do on Sundays, maybe you're struggling. Maybe you're struggling with watching the sermons at home. Maybe you and your family are even singing some. Maybe you're watching the sermons and you're singing a little bit and praying, and maybe you're just struggling with this. And maybe you're struggling with thinking something like, I'm just not sure God is there with us. And we are actually still able to worship him because it doesn't feel the same. You know, you may never verbalize this, but deep down you may be thinking it. And although it doesn't feel the same, and we are called not to forsake the gathering of ourselves together as the church, and we definitely don't want online church to become the norm. We need to remember and we need to know the truth from the Bible. Not our feelings, but we need to know the truth from the Bible that God is not bound by space or time or physical location. He is not bound by any limitations. And worship of him does not just happen at a designated location. As I was doing my daily Bible reading recently, I was reminded of this as I read through Acts chapter 7, which was Stephen's speech to the Jewish religious leaders. And listen to one part of his speech that he says in Acts chapter 7, verses 44 through 50. So Acts chapter 7, beginning in verse 44. Our fathers had the tent of witness in the wilderness, just as he who spoke to Moses directed him to make it, according to the pattern that he had seen. Our fathers in turn brought it with Joshua when they disposed the nations, or dispossessed the nations that God drove out before our fathers. So it was until the days of David, who found favor in the sight of God and asked to find a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built a house for him. And then verse 48. Yet the Most High does not dwell in houses made by hands, as the prophet says, Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord, or what is the place of my rest? Did not my hand make all these things? So whether we find ourselves at a conference or a revival service or a concert with tens of thousands of other Christians, or whether we find ourselves at MHBC on a typical Sunday morning with hundreds of others, or whether we find ourselves at home with our families, and whether that consists of 1 or 3 or 5 or 7 or however many, we can know that we can truly worship God, and he will be there with us, because he is not a God who dwells in houses made by hands, but is a God who is present at every point of space and everywhere in creation at the same time and in his whole being. You want to know why doctrine is so important? This is one reason why. So behind me, as you can see, is the amazing church building that God has blessed us with at Mount Hermon, and inside you'll find the beautiful sanctuary as well. And what a day of rejoicing it's going to be when we are all finally able to get back together and worship God together as a family face to face. That is going to be a day of rejoicing for sure. But I want to encourage you that this is not the only place where we can worship God or where God can be found. Do not be deceived into projecting your limitations on God, but be encouraged and strengthened and find hope in the truth of the Bible that God is omnipresent. And wherever we find ourselves, and with however many we find ourselves with, we can truly worship God and know that he will be there with us. MHBC family and friends, know that we love you, that we miss you, that we are praying for you. And if you or someone you know is in need of anything, please know that we are only a phone call away. God bless.